Good morning. My name is Chuck Howlett. I'm Professor Emeritus of Education from Malloy University here on Long Island. And first, I would like to just thank the staff, the editorial staff at New York Archives, for the wonderful work that they do. I have been a contributor to a number of articles to the magazine, and I very much appreciate the work that the staff does. So a shout out to Michaela and Josie and the rest of the crew for their great work in making this magazine a really top-notch publication for a general readership. My interest, interestingly, I think with this topic about William J. ties in very nicely to the current world political situation regarding war, Iran, the geopolitics, and how can we look at issues involving war and peace. And many years ago, when I was working on my dissertation on John Dewey, I became very interested in his philosophy on how we can solve the problem of war. Not successfully, but nonetheless, it led me to look at the role of the peace movement in American history. And the point that I would like to make is this is an underappreciated aspect of our history. In many respects, the fight for peace and social justice is an integral part of American democracy. And yet it's overshadowed by conflicts. And what we need to look at more carefully is how the United States as a nation very much is interested in world peace, not just through war, but through efforts to prevent war and to promote social justice. And so that led me to look at various individuals, and I came across William J., which is the subject of an article that I forthcoming in the Archives magazine. And what drew me to Jay was that he was also a product of the pre-Civil War reform movement in American history, when you had various efforts to promote women's suffrage, abolitionism, and there is an article that appeared in Archives magazine a couple of years ago on Jay's seminal role in abolitionism. We also had the temperance movement. We had the transcendentalist movement in New England, thinkers like Emerson and Thoreau offering an alternative vision of how we can progress to make America a better society. And so what caught my attention with Jay was, of course, he's the son of the famous first Chief Justice, John Jay. And he looked at the aspect of arbitration, which was a novel idea, although it had been raised previously by thinkers like Pierre Dubois, um, William Penn, and Thomas Auguste. And but what Jay did was he really put it into a work, an important work that he wrote, and I'll just catch it right here for you. The title of his work was War and Peace, the Evils of the First, and a Plan for Preserving the Last. And Jay himself argued that one way we could try to solve the problem of war was through arbitration. And that is when nations were involved in a dispute, they would submit their dispute to neutral arbiter nations who would render a decision in order to prevent war. Naturally, it was a subject that was controversial because how are you going to enforce it? And his idea was, well, let's have binding arbitration. That means that whatever the arbiters decided, neutral countries, that would be the final decision to prevent war from breaking out. Of course, it evolved later on, the idea through the Lake Mohawk Conference on Arbitration, which is an article I wrote previously that appeared in Archives magazine that was very popular, an idea that was being promoted before the outbreak of World War I. Unfortunately, we never really have come to a resolution that would help prevent war through binding arbitration. Although what I wanted to explore, and of course, it did not have an opportunity because in terms of the amount of space that the magazine provides, is to look at the links between Jay's idea regarding arbitration and that of a proposal that was actually adopted in 1928, known as the Pact of Paris or the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which sought to outlaw war as an instrument of national policy. Again, um, the signatories to that agreement never really followed through because, once again, there was never a mechanism to enforce it. And even though we had a League of Nations and now we have the United Nations with the Security Council, the problem still remains that we have not been able to introduce a program that nations would agree to through binding arbitration. So at the time when Jay proposed this in the 1830s, when he would eventually become the president of the American Peace Society, it remains unresolved. But it's an area worth exploring, and that's what led me to take a closer look at Jay's theory about arbitration as a factor in terms of international relations. So it remains a long-standing, ongoing idea without any formal implementation. Jay himself was a very learned individual. He went to Yale, I believe he was maybe 15 years old, which was not unusual when you think about at the time that learning was the amount of learning, unlike what we have today, when there's so many disciplines, you could master subjects to a certain degree. And he had a great pedigree, of course, in the Jay family. And so he went to Yale, where he was very much interested in preventing war, based largely on the influence that his father, John Jay, had, who negotiated a treaty with Great Britain, an unpopular treaty, by the way, that the American public was not very happy with in 1794 to prevent a war. And then it evolved to him looking at the idea of dueling, which he opposed. And he said that evolved eventually into his own views on using law as an instrument for peace. And he said, if we can outlaw piracy and we can outlaw slavery, why can't we find a way to outlaw war or find a way to prevent war? And he wanted to use his legal background, and he introduced it in his work on War and Peace, which was a very seminal work at the time. Eventually, Jay, as president of the American Peace Society, would then be an outspoken opponent of the Mexican War during the 1840s. And he got into an interesting exchange with William Polk. And Polk did not agree with Jay's views as Jay is the president of the American Peace Society. But Jay, like many other thinkers, including Thoreau and other New England abolitionists, saw the war as as a means for the South to extend slavery further west, grab the territory to further expand their ambitions to continue slavery out west. So he was a very important and influential figure who, in my opinion, hasn't been given enough recognition within American history and peace circles. So that's basically what led me to really focus on Jay as a seminal figure in the pre-Civil War period, promoting the idea of peace through arbitration.